Hi, I'm Harrison Barnes. So we're going to get started. And what we'll do, and we do it, is we'll do a presentation, and then after I'll take as many questions as people have, whether about this presentation or anything to do with your career. And what I'm talking about today is actually very important right now because it's about consistently being able to reinvent yourself in your career. And when you look around at many of the most successful attorneys, they've consistently been able to reinvent themselves and find and be resilient, really, in terms of the things that they do in the market, how they position themselves in their careers. This presentation today is going to go into quite a bit of detail about things that can happen to you in your career that you need to be aware of, what you can do to make sure that you're prepared, don't necessarily fall victim to those things. And there really are a lot of things. I see from where I sit, when people come into our placement firm, I see people on a daily basis where their careers just come to a halt. And it's things you wouldn't expect. It's being in the wrong practice area at the wrong time, being in the wrong geographic market. In a lot of cases, it's just luck. And so I'm going to go into all those things today. And it's actually very interesting. And if you're aware of these things, it can really help you because you'll be prepared for things you can't control. And it's the scariest thing, by the way, when you work for someone else is you don't have kind of that sense of control over your career and your life. You're dependent upon others and the economy and all sorts of things for your success. And that can be very scary. And it used to be 100 years ago, almost the majority of people in the United States weren't working for other people. They were working on their own and they had more sense of control over their careers. And now this lack of control is a very scary thing for people. And it's scary when the economy is bad. It's scary in a lot of cases. So I'm going to tell you the things today to look out for that I think are the most important things to be aware of and where things can go wrong. And then I'll also try to propose some solutions. And then certainly when I'm done today, as many questions as you have, please ask them. A lot of attorneys believe that if they go to a good law school, they can get a good job or they get a high paying job. And if they work hard, they're going to have very happy and successful careers. And the thing that I see in my career is that for most attorneys, it's actually much easier to fail than it is to have a successful career. I would say that if you took 100 attorneys and put them in a room, I would say that, more than 50 of them or law school graduates would say that they were not in their careers where they believed they would be. And there's a false sense of confidence that people have. And a lot of that is because they rely upon others. They believe that the economy is going to stay the same, that their law firms are going to stay the same, and that all these things are going to not change. And they do. There's a lot of work that required to become an attorney and even to stay an attorney. You can fail early in your career, or you can actually fail later in your career. Early in your career would be if you choose to attend a law school where it's close to impossible to get opportunities coming out of that law school. That could be when you fail. You could fail when, you don't do well in law school. You can fail if you do a very bad job as a summer associate and get bad reviews. All the time, people fail in their first year in a law firm. And then others fail when they're 5, 10, or 20 years out. I see situations all the time. Even just yesterday, I was talking to a very talented graduate of a top law school that lost his job and tried to find a new one. And he was blackballed by firms in the city because he'd upset some very important people. And he still believed that he could get a job in a major law firm. And it's just based on what happened with him and so forth. And that it's going to be very difficult. Failure can happen at just all points in time. The problem with failure a lot of times is there's just all these factors that you don't have control over. And that's what makes working for other people and law firms and so forth so scary, is that because of these unknown factors, that it can really make your chances of failure much higher than success. And it happens to so many people. This is a depressing talk, but at the same time, what I'm trying to stress to you is if you're aware of where the dangers are, you can do much better in the long run. I've met so many talented attorneys, and actually meet them daily. I encounter them daily. They have so many problems, and things happen often through no fault of their own because they can't necessarily process or understand what's going on in the best way, and then they're not resilient after something bad happens. And I've seen a lot of attorneys. And the first attorney firm I worked in, which is a very prestigious firm, there were I don't know, a couple attorneys I saw go to prison. I've seen lots of people die prematurely. I've seen tons of people just give up and or quit law entirely. For the most part, when people, even more senior people, they believe that negative things that happen to others won't happen to them. And this kind of false confidence is not necessarily a good idea. So you need to be aware of where and this is what I'm talking about today, but where the roadblocks are and where there's bad mistakes you can make. And you need to be aware and ready for those, because if you're not, I mean, it's a problem. And in general, the world is a meritocracy. The people that work the hardest and do the best succeed. Law schools and colleges and law firms do attempt to run something that is a bit of a meritocracy. They want to give people jobs that are the most talented and have the most motivation and look the best on paper and are the most enthusiastic. At the same time, there's just a lot of things that you don't have control over that can really harm you in the long run in your legal career. And I'm going to discuss those things right now. So the first thing you can't control, and you'll never be able to control, is the economic equation that goes on inside of law firms. Everyone needs to really have a decent understanding of economics that works in a law firm, because what they're essentially doing is they're hiring the people that they believe are going to that have the highest quality labor, meaning the people that are able to process information the best and write the best or the most detail-oriented in transactions or prosecution or whatever they're doing. And they want to hire them at the lowest possible price to produce services. And in any law firm that knows what it's doing, they always want to have some downward pressure on the wages. They don't want your billing rate to keep going up if clients aren't going to pay it. There always is going to be a preference for junior associates and things where they can charge lower rates and you can work harder. And the more people there are like you in most markets, the less that they can pay. There's all sorts of tricks they use. They use contract attorneys and things to drive rates down. But essentially, they're hiring machines. An attorney, that's what you are, is your machine. And they want you to do the most work they can. They want you to work the most hours at the lowest possible price. And to make you work the most hours, they may build nice offices and cafeterias and things. But that's what their goal is. They're trying to make profit. They're good machines, obviously, and they're bad machines. If you went to really good schools and you did well and you've worked at good firms, you're smart and you have a good personality, all that will factor into your value in the market. And like most of us, if you had the choice between buying a new car and a used car, most people want to buy newer machines because they'll typically work harder and cost less, and there will be fewer problems with those machines. And they like machines that don't need a lot of service, meaning that they don't break down or they don't complain. The more money you want to make, the better machine you should be. So people that don't need a lot of training and so forth. It's essentially, you have to understand this very simple economic model. And I hate to equate humans to machines, but that's what they are. As an associate or a more senior associate, you're a machine. And then as you get older, as an attorney, you're expected to bring in business. And if you don't bring in business, you won't have a lot of employment security. Law firms like machines that are bringing in business. And the same thing happens with partners. They pay partners as little as they possibly can in order for money to flow to the top or whatever. Obviously, partners make more than most machines, which would be an associate or a counsel. But as long as you bring in a lot more revenue than the law firm pays you, and you have the kind of qualifications and do the type of work that the firm has a brand for doing, then you'll do well. And law firms will continually raise partners' billing rates, and that creates a lot of pressure for partners, and they continually need to pass on that, and that creates a lot of anxiety. So this whole economic equation that's going on inside of law firms, you just can't control. They continually expect people to work harder, that people are continually getting more senior and being less and less useful. They continually need people to bring in business. And then once you do bring in business, they continually are going to try to raise your billing rates, and they just get more and more competitive. And if you don't produce a lot of profit for a law firm, meaning as a partner, you're not bringing in a lot more business than you're getting paid. And if you're an associate, you're not working a lot of hours and getting a lot of work, you're always going to be in danger of losing your job. And most attorneys that aren't billing a lot of hours will just start looking for a job. And what's going on in all law firms is just this economic equation is happening in the background where regardless of the law firm you're at, the law firm is always like culling the herd. It's always pushing people out and bringing hungrier people in, or people with more business and partners and that can bill higher billing rates, or associates that aren't working as hard. And it's happening all the time around you. And that's just something you can't control. And typically the bigger and better run law firms, and they get that way because they have very good systems in place for doing that. So the more competitive a law firm you're working for, the more likely that's going on in the background, and it's probably going on fairly aggressively. And as an attorney, I mean, you're constantly getting older. Every one of us is getting older. There's always going to be more enthusiastic and hungrier people coming up behind you. And there's people that are always going to be willing to produce more, do more for less money. And that's something else you have to be aware of. As you get older, your value goes down. If you don't have business, that's troubling. And none of this is something you can control. And the idea is that there's just going to be this pressure on you constantly. There's going to be pressure on you to bill a lot of hours when you're young. There's pressure on you to bring in business when you're older. Even the most successful and the oldest partners in law firms are always trying to bill as many hours as they can. People leave this environment because of the economic equation. Like, people aren't, leaving law firms all the time just because they want to do different types of work most of the time. Most of the time they're leaving because of this economic equation. It's just hanging over them. It's in the background all the time. They know they're getting, their value is based on how much business or how many hours they're billing. So that's a lot of pressure. And the more sophisticated markets you get into, meaning large cities and so forth, and the more sophisticated the firm, the stronger that economic equation is going to be. If that economic equation was not operating aggressively, it would be impossible for them to pay, first-year associates and so forth as much as they do pay. It's just what's going on, and that's why there's the high salaries, and it's very stressful. It's the people that are in the firm are the ones that are creating that pressure, and it's just how the business model works. Even as you get older, partners on this call, I'm sure, can testify to this, but I work with a lot of partners, and there's just a lot of fights about money all the time. Law firms will pay their partners as little as they possibly can, just as they will expect their associates to work as hard as they can. Most partners that leave do not like dealing with all this stress and this economic equation. And many leave. I talk to people all the time that leave with millions of dollars in business on the table, and they just leave because they want to go to a position where this isn't operating in the background. So that's what you get into if you work inside of a law firm. You're always going to have this economic equation behind you. You can't escape it. Even when you go to boutique firms and places that say that they're really nice, pleasant places to work, in most cases, that's still operating in the background. And most boutique firms would be happy to grow and become big, and many do if they could control this. And really what you're seeing in most law firms is this. It's just continually going on in the background. And it's something you need to be aware of. Realize that it's there and you can't control it. And the reason it's scary is that it will push you out and you will have problems if you're not doing the best job that you can and billing the most hours and so forth. It always is going to be there, always. And it's always been the reason that people leave law firms. It's always been the reason that people aren't happy in law firms. And it's just what it is. And you need to accept it and realize how it works. That's it. Okay, so another thing you'll never be able to control, unfortunately, is your natural talent. Some have natural talent in the practice of law and others don't. And I don't say that in a negative way. If you don't have natural talent, it doesn't mean you can't be very successful. But some people are just extremely talented at the practice of law. I can remember 2 or 3 times in my career talking to some attorneys that were just, a couple of attorneys who were absolutely extraordinary. And they could see so much more than I could see, and the way their mind worked, I knew that I didn't think my mind might ever work that way. And I've only encountered that a couple of times, but there's some very smart people out there. And the other thing, natural talent is some extent, people that do well in the LSATs, I hate to say it, and get good grades, they have the ability a lot of times to really cut through issues and see things, not get distracted, and pick up concepts in a very quick way. And that's not to say that there's not exceptional attorneys that don't do great in the LSAT or get great grades, but when you can use your talent in other ways. But that's a sign of talent, and some attorneys have it and others don't. And you can be limited, though, to some extent by your talent. Your ability to pick up certain ideas and make certain arguments and is an issue, and that's going to control how far you go. And I shouldn't try to scare you away. Even if you're in your first couple of years of practice, it takes a while to know what type of talent you have, and you need to go into a practice area and work with people where that talent's going to be recognized and where you can do well. People do have issues with talent sometimes, and you can get, if you're not talented, it's determined what happens to you. And that's not a great thing sometimes. Attorneys are very smart. I know my dentist, for example, his wife is an attorney that went to University of Chicago Law School, and very smart, obviously. You have to do really well to get in there. She sells real estate and has been doing it for a long time, and makes far more money than most attorneys in large law firms because she's taking her talent and putting it in another type of area. It's actually working out for her. So you need to put your talent to use. You can do it in law firms. You can do it all sorts of places. But you need to realize the kind of talent that you have and where it's best used. And the best attorneys will have the ability to understand complex ideas. They have the ability to outthink and outmaneuver other attorneys. And other things that they do, they can be resilient, but the ability to process information and understand concepts and things are important. And if you don't have those abilities, as you get more senior, you realize you don't. You could, in some cases, get eaten alive by competitors. And I've seen that. If a good litigator goes up against a bad litigator, almost always the good litigator wins. And if it's a complex matter. And so it's just something to think about with your talent, and where do you use it? The idea to think about where you use your talent means you have to go into a practice area, work with people where your talent's going to be the most useful. And anyone that passes the bar exam and goes to law school is capable of making an exceptional living, meaning a very good living, being an attorney and doing great things. But you have to put your skills to use in a place where you have the talent. And so some cases, people are interested in certain things. And if you're very interested in a certain part of a practice area, you may do very well there and have a skill that other people don't. Like I saw someone yesterday that's just very interested in matters affecting the Catholic Church and has spent their entire career doing that. And that's very interesting. This person has advanced, done very well because of their passion there. And that's not something everybody's willing to get into. And that talent can be put to use in a good place. And you don't always have to put your talent to use in an environment where you think you should be. And the problem with not having natural talent, being good at practicing law, is that it's like someone with no athletic ability trying to play a sport. You're just not going to do as well, and it's going to create problems. And there is a place for attorneys at all skill levels in different law firms. But if you don't have a lot of natural talent, you're never going to really get that far. You have to have the ability to help people and represent them and help companies. If you don't have, that's just something that's going to hurt you. And you need to be able to understand how to do well. And people get jobs that don't have natural talent, but the ones that don't typically are into the most ostensible. You're going to be most likely to lose your job. You're going to have the hardest time maintaining a long-term career. And you're really going to be fighting an uphill battle. And that's not fun. It's not fun. If I was trying to go out and play professional basketball, I don't think I would enjoy work each day. But I think, that constant disappointment where it's going to be next to impossible for me to compete with people at that level is going to be hard, especially since I'm not a big fan of playing basketball. Without enthusiasm for what you're doing, that's a problem. My advice to anybody, by the way, if you feel like that you're in a practice area that you don't like, sometimes it's just a question of being in the wrong practice area. Sometimes there's people that tend to like to read and write that are verbal, and there's people that are very good at math and science and that sort of thing. And being in the right practice area is important. Someone that's very verbal typically would not enjoy corporate work, but I've seen lots of very talented verbal people do that. But you want to be in a practice area where you have a lot of enthusiasm for what you're doing. You find it interesting. The attorney I was telling you about that represents the Catholic, or all these Catholic interests, obviously was very interested in that and had gone to seminary and done all these other things. And so if you're interested in that sort of thing, then that's a good thing. Putting your talent to use there is smart, but you have to be enthusiastic about what you're doing. Okay, so and if you are enthusiastic, then you can do well because other people are not taking the time to concentrate on what you're doing. And then the longer you do something, the more things that you see you can help people with. Okay, so the next thing is you'll never be able to control is your human mistakes and your vulnerabilities. This is actually a fairly interesting one and is troubling. So one attorney that I know, is in jail and getting ready to be sentenced to federal prison for several years. And I met her when she was actually looking for a job. She'd been in an auto accident and was injured and then was prescribed some pain pills. She was a fairly conservative person and actually had never drank alcohol or even used drugs. And I graduated, another University of Chicago Law School graduate, and graduated from there and worked in a series of top firms. But when she started taking these pain pills, and there's sometimes people just are vulnerable. People can be vulnerable to different types of addictions. And this particular pill, I guess, whatever the opioids she was taking, she became addicted to and lost her job and started buying pills after the doctor stopped prescribing them on the dark web. Somehow got involved committing financial crimes when she was on her own after all this. And that's a sad story. And obviously her career is over and she's going to spend time in federal prison. But this kind of thing happens to people all the time. You're vulnerable to, everybody's vulnerable to making mistakes. I know another attorney that, got drunk one night, an argument with his girlfriend, ended up getting accused of attempted murder. And this is an attorney from Sherman Sterling. And it was a mistake and he got off. But just things like that happen and people make mistakes. You just need to be very careful. And you don't know what's going to happen to you. Life events can happen. I saw one attorney tell a friend, walk into an office of a young partner and tell them that he didn't think a certain assignment was necessary for him to do. And because of that, he was fired and blackballed in the legal community 3 months into his legal career, which is, just insane. Couldn't find another job. And he was a graduate of a very good law school. I knew another attorney that took paternity leave who was very successful kind of on a partnership track. And he decided he was going to take a 3-week paternity leave at a firm where people didn't do that. And when he returned, the firm never gave him another assignment. He ended up, having to go in-house. And these are just, I don't know, none of these are mistakes, really. Someone that gets addicted to pain pills, that's not necessarily their mistake. It's a human vulnerability, or telling someone you don't think an assignment's necessary. But he was a little bit vocal about it. When you don't really know how law firms work is not a mistake, but it's none of these are bad things. I knew another attorney that was fired for getting to attach a signature paper to what's called a verification from the client to a response to discovery. And that person, a very senior attorney, lost their job and wasn't able to become a partner. And that was a Harvard Law graduate. And just a simple mistake. Another attorney I knew had been working several all-nighters and for months and slept in late for a deal that he was supposed to, be there with a client to have signed, and he got fired and blackballed. I knew a partner with a huge book of business, $10 million plus, and he'd had an affair with a paralegal. It happened years ago, but it somehow came to light not too long ago. He lost his job and ended up being blackballed. I knew another attorney that was the head of a practice group at a major AmLaw 100 law firm. I had too much to drink and insulted another attorney at the firm, and the same thing. I knew another attorney. I can list these things forever. I mean, I'll tell them to you just because, they're kind of little warnings. But another attorney that, posted a negative comment about his firm on an online discussion thread and had no idea that his firm had screen recording software on his computer, and he got fired. That was at a major firm. So they were recording everything he did in his computer. I knew another person that had a rip in his jeans. They were showing his underwear, and it was at a big firm in a relatively small market, or a mid-sized market, and that was conservative. And he lost his job because it was showing his underwear. So these kind of things they affect partners, they affect associates, it's just all these little things that can happen to you in your career are scary. And that's one of the reasons why, again, working for other people is scary and it's difficult. As machines, the most valuable ones, of course, are the ones that don't have problems or cause problems. And when you work in a law firm, all sorts of things can happen. And you may make mistakes in your personal and professional life. And those things can really sidetrack your career. You never know. Things get out of control. That's hard. I've seen so many examples of people that just things happen and they really couldn't have predicted them. And it's sad. You have to really be in control. And one of the things I always talk about that I think is important, and this isn't really related to today's presentation, but I just want to bring it up, is these human mistakes and vulnerabilities happen, I think, a lot of times when people just don't take care of themselves. They're not balanced. They don't exercise, or they don't have outside activities. They put too much into their jobs. And so anytime you have balance, like a lot of times these things don't happen. And A lot of times, sometimes they do. But anytime something's out of kilter, an affair is out of balance, drugs are out of balance, careless mistakes are out of balance, things just happen that shouldn't. So you just need to be careful. And that's a problem. When you work for other people, we all want to be vulnerable. And that's one of the things that's so hard about being an attorney in a law firm is there's a lot of times you can't be as much. And certainly law firms are understanding to some extent, but in other respects, they're not. And they want to have the best machines there that function the best. And if there's something wrong with you or some big problem, then they'll just find another one. And law firms it's very easy for them to find replacements. Okay, so this is another big one. And this is something that I think is one of the most important. And I've seen some people are asking questions and raising their hand and stuff. I will, if you save your questions, and even if you can type them out right now, I will answer them when this presentation is done, because I know these are all going to be good questions and I'm happy to answer them. But this one is you'll never be able to control recessions in the legal market. And this is a big one. So every 8 to 10 years, there's always been a major recession in the legal market as long as I've been doing this. There was one in 2000 through 2002. That was when the dot-com meltdown happened. Then there was 9/11, which shut a lot of stuff down. Then there was another one from late 2007, maybe, 2008 to 2010, from subprime lending and credit crisis and so forth. And then, of course, there was another one with 2020. And what happens always leading up to those is there's a lot of enthusiasm in the market and businesses are expanding, and then they borrow a lot of money to fund the expansion. And then the credit, and then they expand too much, and then businesses start failing, and there's recession, and there's a credit crisis, and it's the same thing over and over again. It's just every 8 to 10 years, and it's been happening for a long time. And it's actually the same thing. It's interesting with every 50 years or so in the United States, there's been a social revolution. In 2020, you've had lots of protests and things, and that has an effect. And 50 years ago, there was the same thing in the 1970s. 1970, and then 50 years before that in the 1920s, the same thing. These things happen. There's patterns to recessions, there's patterns to social movements, and there's patterns to, but recessions are really the one that for your purposes are the most important. So when recessions occur, it's absolutely devastating. It's not a good thing. And every time I've seen it, it's been just absolutely awful. What happens is new attorneys coming out of law school have a very difficult time finding jobs. It becomes very difficult, especially for young attorneys, to hold on to jobs. Law firms typically will start off doing stealth layoffs, meaning they'll start letting people go for performance reasons, which is insane because a lot of times they're letting very young attorneys go where you can't possibly evaluate their performance because they don't even know what they're doing yet. The firms will conclude that they have too many machines to support and get rid of people, and in order to save money and to drive profit to the top. So they need to keep paying partners a certain amount of money, and they have pressure to do that. And then the people that are expendable tend to be attorneys without business that are more senior, and then certainly attorneys that need training, which are younger ones. It becomes much harder to get jobs. And then people typically will leave law firms lots of people will leave law firms. They will be scarred by bad reviews, probably in many cases are not justified. They will look for other careers, and they'll go to work for the government, and they'll just have a very difficult time. I see this time and time again. And I would say 2020 was probably the worst year that I've ever seen in terms of people coming out of law school without jobs and job offers being let go. And unfortunately, at that time, people have not really understood when the problems are going to stop. The thing that is just horrible is that when a recession happens when someone's starting their legal career and they're not yet established, many never recover. They will go to work sometimes in smaller firms or in other practice areas. People that might have been very good corporate attorneys, corporate work becomes very hard to find, and they end up doing litigation where they may not be good fits or have the natural talent. Many times they go to work in smaller markets and smaller law firms where it becomes impossible for them to ever work in a large law firms. Again, many lose confidence and are not resilient, able to recover. First, second, third, fourth year associates, many times that are in certain practice areas will lose their jobs. People make the mistake. What happens in major markets during these recessions is places like New York and so forth. People believe and they have a sense of entitlement that they went to a good law school and so forth, and they should continue working there. at a good firm. Jobs become very hard to get in the major markets where everyone wants to work. Many people do not leave those markets when they should and go to smaller markets where there are opportunities, and that hurts them. The only thing I can tell you, I will answer questions about this. If in a recession, the most important thing is to stay employed. It doesn't matter really where you work, that you have to stay employed, because the longer you're unemployed, the more likely you are to find something else to do. Your legal skills will deteriorate, and you will look like you are not being aggressive enough representing yourself, finding a job. But that's the thing, is you can't control these recessions. But I will tell you that every 8 to 10 years they happen. When they happen, you have to be in a position where you want to be someplace that you believe is going to stay busy. You want to be working with people you believe are going to support you and have your back. And when recessions happen, the things that most people do not think they're going to happen, there's a false sense of confidence that people have in the legal market, believing that the economy is always going to be good. That's how they get burned. And I see so many people get burned like in recessions. I see them get burned in the property market. I see them get burned in the stock market. I see them, because everybody just goes into these things not believing, wanting to believe that it's not going to happen. And for attorneys, I see it all the time firsthand because of where I sit, talking to people looking for jobs. You need to really know what's happening and be ready for them. And when they are, you need to take action. And I'm happy to answer more questions about that later if anyone has any questions. But that's a big. The next thing you can't control is advancement or demotion. Those are difficult because advancement and promotion are often very random inside of law firms, and you really do not know how to control it. And one of the reasons that I put together this list is because it's just that there's so much that's so random, and that's the sense of insecurity that attorneys have is difficult. It's just a very difficult thing, and it's what do you do about it? And you have to really navigate. And I think these roadblocks and things that happen to people are in every profession, of course, but I think they're actually much harder for attorneys and to deal with. But for most young attorneys, advancement in a law firm may mean becoming a partner. Years ago, when you joined a law firm out of law school, that was where you spent your career. It's not like that anymore. For other attorneys, it may be that are partners, it may be earning more money, getting better cases, becoming an equity partner instead of an income partner, becoming a counsel, which is actually at some big firms is probably more difficult than becoming a partner at most firms, or staff attorney to associate attorney. Other attorneys are just very nervous about losing their titles, or an equity partner can be at risk of losing their title. And so there's all sorts of things that can be quite random. And the problem is it's very difficult to predict what happens to you. You just don't know. I see partners that are equity partners getting demoted all the time, and they never expected that to happen to them. I see people becoming partners inside of law firms that frankly never expected that to happen to them. And you just don't know. Getting an advanced to partner may be because you bill the most hours, or it may be for other reasons. And in most cases, having a connection with someone who has political weight is very important, but not always. And they could sometimes, or they may be based on social imbalances. So they may, not have enough women partners or people from certain backgrounds, and they may do things along those reasons. And you can't, and the opposite may occur. Maybe there's a glass ceiling for people with certain backgrounds. You can't predict this stuff, and that's difficult. You just can't predict a law firm holding on to you. I remember one, and she's actually a very well-known attorney now, but I was working with her early in her career, and she was working at a major law firm, and she was up for partner, and she thought she was going to make partner. They told her everything was good. Her performance was very good. And then they didn't make her partner. And not only that, they asked her to leave. This happened in the space of 3 days. It was it's scary. You think you're at the top, you think you're doing really well, and then all of a sudden someone asks you to leave when you think the day you thought you were going to make partner. And they just thought she would be sour grapes, or I don't know. But it's just, you can't predict things that happen. It's difficult because it's random. And in this particular case, a woman who's gone to a top law school, had spent 10 years at the same firm, and you can know other things that can happen that I've seen a lot and you can't control. Sometimes law firms will merge. I was at a firm that ended up merging, and there were people that were going to become partners before the merger, but after the merger, there were people came in that had a lot more business than the existing attorneys there. And all of a sudden, these people that had been there, one of them that I knew very well was asked to leave. And so you just don't know. There's just so much that controls whether or not you succeed or whether or not you advance, and politics and so forth going on behind the scenes. So you really You can control all this stuff by having business and connected to the right people, but at the same time, there's a lot of luck that's involved, and you really many times can't control that. So another thing you can't control is the success of your law firm. And no one can control the law firm's success. Law firms can make colossal business decisions, very poor business decisions that end up making them go out of business. Some of them sometimes will enter into agreements. They'll try to hire like more partners. This is why a lot of firms have gone out of business. And most of the well-known firms, they enter into agreements to pay partners too much money, regardless of how much business the partners bring in. That ends up making them go out of business. That happens actually quite a bit. They may lease too much office space that they don't need. Sometimes they may have giant malpractice verdicts against them and go out of business. I've seen that happen a couple of times. Sometimes they'll open a lot of branch offices and won't be able to keep the attorneys there happy or attract enough people. They can take on too much debt. They can have a compensation mechanism that upsets, a lot of partners and doesn't make them think it's fair. So a lot of them will leave, or they'll leave for other reasons. So just things happen, and happen to firms. Attorneys can't control it. I've known many attorneys that join law firms, great brands, and I thought the firms would be very successful, and then the firms went out of business. And I've seen many times attorneys move their families to where the law firms were, and law firms went out of business. I knew one of my people that I knew very well joined a law firm, and then it became a big law firm. It was called Stein, and then that went out of business. When the owner of the firm found out that he was selling fake securities to keep his law firm going. All these things happen, and he's in prison now. You just can't control it. You just can't control the success of your law firm many times. You just don't know. You can join the right law firm, and I joined two law firms in my career. One was a large New York law firm that went out of business for paying partners too much money without guarantees. And then the other, when I joined, it was fairly small and took off and became extremely successful. So these are just things you can't control. It's a lot of luck. I worked at another law firm actually in New York. I worked at a firm called Dewey Ballantyne that went out of business. And then I almost worked at a law firm called Reed and Priest that at the time, and when I was in law school, I think it was like the third or second oldest firm in New York City, or actually may have been the oldest. And it went out of business. And I joined a firm called Quinn Emanuel, and then it became a 1,000 attorney firm. So you can't control the success of any of these law firms. So if you look at that, it's interesting. 2/3 of the law firms that I could have settled down in, like Reed and Priest or Dewey Ballantyne, failed. And if I spent my careers with them, I would have been like an 8th or 9th year associate by the time they went out of business. I would have been in a lot of trouble. And then the other one, if I'd stayed there, I probably wouldn't have been. I'd probably been in good shape. But you just can't control this stuff. And it's scary. When you're working in a law firm, you don't know what's going to happen to it. The attorneys for most of these law firms go out of business, ended up doing fine, but not all of them did. I mean, a lot of them went into different types of careers. So the next thing you can't control is your luck. A lot of your success is going to be due to luck. Getting a job in the right firm is often due to chance. Out of those 3 firms I told you, 2 of them were unlucky. But sometimes people can get a really good client, and that can be luck. I knew one woman in Chicago that brought in Sears, and if she hadn't done that, and actually Sears may not be the best client anymore, but that can be luck. And that became a multi-million-dollar client at your firm. Getting the right mentor can be luck. If you have a good mentor, that mentor can help steer you and create all sorts of opportunity for you. And even being on this webinar, if you're learning and you're getting information that changes the direction of your career, that can be very good, something that helps make you lucky or not. So let me just see here. Sorry, I'm just missing something. Okay, yeah. So several years ago, as I was telling you, I was working with an attorney who was looking for a job, and she was a senior associate. And a few weeks into her search, she went to a networking event for African American attorneys and met the general counsel of just a very large firm. And he invited her to submit a proposal. They needed someone who was outside counsel who was African American, and she brought in over $10 million in business a year to her firm just from that, and became an equity partner. And that's complete luck. You're at the right place at the right time. Something really positive like that happens to you, and that is really a cool thing. And that's luck. You just can't control this type of luck. Sometimes with the right mentor can make a huge difference. In many law firms, you definitely need some people that are putting their name on the line and so forth to make you partner. That can be luck. I met a very successful attorney working at one of the largest law firms in the country on a flight not too long ago. And out of law school, he started working for this older partner that had this very large book of business. That partner retired and gave it to him. That was very interesting because if he had been hired when that partner was earlier in his career as an associate, he would have probably never gotten that book of business and left the firm, but he got that big book of business and that made him very successful. And sometimes you can be in the right, place at the right time and you just don't know. That can be very helpful as well in terms of what you do. So a lot of it is just a lot of luck. You just can't control the luck many times. Okay, and then another important thing, and I'm almost done with these, I just have a couple more, is what happens with your practice area. And this is actually a very big one because attorneys will choose their practice area sometimes earlier in their career, sometimes later in their career, with the expectation that's a good practice area to be in and good things will happen. And that's not necessarily always the case because you don't have control all the time over what's going to happen in your practice area. So when I started in the placing business, the hottest practice area was patent prosecution by far. Law firms were extremely hungry to get in this practice area and were just hiring everybody that they possibly could, even large law firms. I had one of the strangest things happen to me. It was one of the first attorneys that I got an offer for. And this is, I don't know, 20 years ago. But what happened was there was so much demand that this attorney he was in like Seattle or something like that. And he was maybe making $80,000 a year. He got an offer to work in a firm in the Bay Area for maybe $150,000 a year. He said he didn't know. He was thinking about it. The taxes were higher in California. And then the law firm offered him like a $50,000 starting bonus. And I think they upped his salary to $175,000. It was just crazy. And you don't see that kind of stuff anymore. But back then you did. Law firms were just very hungry to get in that practice area. And there weren't a lot of people in the background in the law that had science backgrounds and so forth compared to how many there are now. And because there was so much money and so much opportunity, lots of people with science backgrounds started going to law school. And people in third world countries, the internet kind of started evolving, and they started working on patents and helping with those. And smaller law firms popped up doing the work at fixed costs and at billable hour rates. And there's been, since that time, like a lot of downward pressure on the rates. Large law firms don't like that downward pressure on rates because they want to charge not flat fees, but hourly fees. And so more of that work now is going to smaller firms. The large law firms have been many large law firms, not all of them, but have started letting patent attorneys go. And many companies like Microsoft and Amazon, just to give you an understanding of it, actually have a small law firm, even a single attorney sometimes working at home, doing these patents at a fixed cost. But what happened is they had all these patent attorneys and that they weren't using, and they decided they were doing this fixed cost work. And so they decided that a really good use of these people would be to do patent litigation. So they wanted to have a lot of attorneys do patent litigation, and they started hiring a lot of litigators to do patent litigation, and that got extremely busy and became a huge money. Firms made a lot of money from it for a long time. And then there was a decision that came out called Alice Corp versus CLS Bank. And this is after thousands and thousands of attorneys went in, or probably tens of thousands, went into patent litigation. And this limited the ability of patent trolls to bring cases only in jurisdictions where the infringers were located, and those weren't all plaintiff friendly. So once this happened, what happened is just all these lawsuits went away, and patent litigators are still losing their jobs, and it's not a good thing. There's a lot of it's been going on. The firms have been thinning the herds for a long time. So people that wanted to do patent prosecution ended up not having the careers they thought they would. And the same thing with patent litigation. And this is like this with all practice areas. That corporate, every 8 to 10 years, takes a significant hit, and corporate attorneys lose their jobs. Typically, I haven't seen it as much recently, but typically trademark work will come to a complete standstill. Real estate, when interest rates get high, that practice area typically stops, and that hasn't happened in a long time, but that's what happens there. And then bankruptcy, of course, if there are a lot of bankruptcies and the economy is doing very poorly, then that does well. But at other times, it becomes very difficult for bankruptcy attorneys to find jobs. You know that as well. So that's how that works. And the other thing is just the political party and power will often control different types of work. So environmental work can be busy, obviously, when the Democrats are in power, and Republicans are, it can be the opposite. And there's just all sorts of patterns like that. I'm not sure that this environmental thing is a great analogy, but the political party in power, the spending that's happening and so forth can have a lot of bearing on what happens to you. And there's just broader socioeconomic forces, and it can happen to people regardless of their background. The next thing is just you can't control is being in the right legal market at the right time. And this is the next to last one, and this is important. If you're in the right legal market, you may do very well. And if you're in the wrong one, you may not. During the 2008, 2009, 2010 recession, there was a lot of oil and gas work in Texas. That market continued to do well through that recession when other markets went to a standstill. If you got started at that time in Texas, you would have done very well compared to New York. When the economy is doing well, New York City is a great legal market. It's just a very exciting place to be. When it's not, the market there doesn't do as well either. The tech market's doing well, which it has been for a long time. The Bay Area does well. When you had, of course, like the dot-com explosion in 2000, 2001, that market came to a complete standstill. And it was a horrible market, one of the worst in the country for corporate attorneys. And the same thing happened in 2007, 2008. Detroit tends to be somewhat, dependent on the automotive market, not as much as it used to be, but that's another market. But the point is, you don't have a lot of control over what happens in your legal market. And the legal markets you choose to join can have a lot of impact on whether or not you're going to succeed. Being in a smaller market, a lot of times you're going to be insulated from the pressures of a large legal market, but not always. And the practice area you're in, of course, has a big impact as well. Okay, and this is the final one, and this is just a fairly quick one, and then I will take questions after taking a quick break. But one of the things you also can't control are your natural political skills. And people can work hard at long hours. You can even, to some extent, learn to bring in business. But your political skills are something that are difficult to control because your ability to network with people, make people like you, these are skills that a lot of times people just pick up from their parents and their environments. Unfortunately, you can learn these skills. I mean, there's classes like Dale Carnegie, networking groups and stuff, but a lot of times people have these skills and others don't. Unfortunately, that's determines how far you'll go many times. So some people just have these skills and they're the game and you need to learn them, but they will control to a great extent what happens to you. And I do think you can learn how to be political and politics, but not everybody can. It's the way it is. Okay, one of the things, just in conclusion, a lot of our self-worth does come from, and security comes from the type of work that we do. And when you choose a law firm career, much of what happens to you is going to be beyond your control. And there's just so much anxiety that people have because anytime you don't know what's going to happen to you, it's like almost like an animal in the wilderness doesn't know if it's going to be attacked or something. It's difficult. And our work determines many of us our self-worth and how we perceive ourselves. There's just so much that factors into how well we do. And there's just a lot of stuff in the law firm environment you can't control. So when we come back, I will take a quick break just for 1 minute. And if you can type out as many questions as you guys have. I do have a lot of time to answer questions. So any questions you have about your career, all these questions are anonymous, so you can ask them anonymously. I certainly won't use your name or anything. You want to ask about any of what I've talked about here today, or even about your resume or your experience or how to market yourself, or any questions I'm happy to answer. And I will be back in about 1 minute. Thanks. All right, so I'm going to go to questions. And then one other thing I would say is if you guys click the Q&A window, you should see the questions as I'm answering them. So something told me that. So I will start these questions right now. So just if you click on the Q&A window, then you'll see the questions I'm answering. Okay, so the first question, I practice criminal defense law. I hope to transition to a new practice area. I'm interested in health, medical law, and labor and employment law. How important are grades for an attorney who's been practicing for 11 years? After a decade of practice, what should an attorney do if he or she doesn't have a writing sample? Okay, the first thing is there's an article that I've written called Law School Grades in Your Career. You should hopefully take a look at that article, and that kind of explains your question. But the big thing is that grades really aren't important at all when you've been out of law school more than 4 or 5 years. Grades are just used to evaluate you against your peers when you get out of school because there's nothing else to identify to evaluate you based on. And So that's really the thing to understand is grades aren't going to be as important. I would think as a criminal attorney, you would have a writing sample. I don't see people asking for writing samples very much. But if you want to do labor and employment law, for example, you're going to need to get a writing sample. I would think that briefs and things you've written for the court as a criminal attorney would be helpful. But if you don't have a writing sample, you should just try to, use something you've written. Any public document that you file with the court, you can always use for a writing sample without hurting attorney-client privilege and that sort of thing. But yeah, grades are not that important for someone that's been practicing that long. And then the other thing I would recommend you do is I've written a lot of articles about how to switch practice areas, and I would also do a search for those. The other person says, I wish I'd have seen this before law school. I never would have went. Okay, yeah, I understand that. One of the things I would say is that unfortunately, the problem with working for other people in any type of business is there's so many things you can't control. And so your objective really is to make yourself as attractive to employers as you can, and that's the way you get control. When I represent people in this business, because there's so much randomness in firms and how they hire and stuff, I'm always trying to get people to look at more markets and look at more firms in their markets, and because there's always opportunity out there, you just need to find the right opportunity. Okay, let's see. The next question is, should someone who clearly doesn't have natural talent, should they use their time more wisely and find something outside of the law? Yes, I do think so. I'll tell you a quick story. Most of the attorneys that I've worked with in my career have been very good, but I have worked with some people before that really were not good. One person I'm thinking of in particular, and that particular person I told they shouldn't be practicing law, and that was out of maybe working with hundreds of attorneys in my career. And but if you don't have natural talent, the problem is if you don't have natural talent in something, I firmly believe that everybody is good at something. And if you look at everybody's been given some sort of talent by the universe, really, honestly, they have. And if you look at anybody, those people will have talent. And I don't know what it is, but there's something that you have talent in. And if it's not practicing law, then it could be something else. Now, you can learn how to practice law and be good at it. And there's lots of practice areas where your skill as a writer or your skill in other things aren't as important, where your ability to influence juries may be important, or your ability to do certain types of things may be important. And so you can find a practice area, but unless you're really good at something, a lot of times you're better off, you can be much better off sometimes doing something else. And practicing law is one of those things. If you really like it, the odds are that you'll be good at it, but you have to like the work and not, the authority you get from being an attorney and that sort of thing. That's the thing. But that's a great question. If you have any more follow-ups, I'm happy to answer them. Okay, for example, I have real bad sleep apnea, and it makes me very sleepy during the day and hard to wake up with a clear mind in the morning, making it more difficult to hold down a job at a law firm. Yeah, if you have health problems, it makes it difficult to be in a law firm. I mean, there's certainly other practice settings you can be in, but anything where you're evaluated based on having to be sharp and people are paying for your time, you need to think about whether or not that's the right place to be, or doing another type of law. I know one attorney fairly well that she had some kind of autoimmune disorder, and because of that, stopped working in a major law firm and actually started working as a contract attorney and was happy doing that. If you have health issues, you have to decide what the best setting is for you, because if something's going to hold you back, then that's not good. You have to be in a situation where you're not being held back. Okay, this is an interesting question. So I am debating whether or not to, and if anybody has any follow-up questions about these questions or more questions, just anything you can think of, I'm happy to answer. So I'm debating whether or not to accept the new offer. I started a job search because I was really unhappy with a managing attorney, and I'm not alone in that other attorneys have come and gone due to the up and down behaviors and mood swings. I'm not sure if I should stay put or accept the new offer. I don't want my resume to be spotty, but I also don't want to be unhappy. Benefits are similar, get a little more with a new one. What are the best ways to evaluate what to do? Also, is it better to do general practice work or specialty work? Okay, one of the things is, I'm telling you this as being part of the legal recruiting industry, and typically if you're unhappy somewhere and you move, it's going to be, law firms are looking for kind of three things when an attorney's moving that are important. Let me see if I can actually do something here. Give me 1 second. See if I can open. I just want to make sure I open something I'm going to pause real quickly, and then I'm going to open another screen. Just give me 1 second. Pause the share. Give me 1 second. I just want to do this because I want to show you guys something here. If I can. Okay, I guess I can. Let me just resume share. Give me 1 second. Okay, law firms are looking for three things when they're hiring someone. They're looking whether or not the person can do the job, whether or not they can be managed, and whether or not they'll do the job long term. So those are the three questions. And it's important to remember those because they're the ability to be managed and do the job. It just comes down really to your resume and your previous experience. And then the ability to be managed means can you get along with people that you work with? And then the third one is will you do the job long term? So it sounds to me like this isn't an ability of you being able to be managed. It's just there's someone there that is very unpleasant to work with. And what I would be concerned about with a person that's unpleasant to work with, and everyone, this is a very common type of problem and question that people have is they work with someone who's very toxic. And because of that, they get out of the practice of law many times, or they work somewhere else. One of the things that is good to do anytime you're with someone that's really unpleasant like that is you want to try to, first of all, that's what's called a kind of a resentment. You want to be very careful about resenting people because really what that's doing is that's giving them even more control over you. And when you give people control over you, that makes you even more unhappy. So you're a victim of that person's mood swings. And it sounds like you're not the only person. I remember when I was practicing law, there was a woman that was so unpleasant that people were leaving this very prestigious New York law firm and doing things like they were so shell-shocked, they were becoming waitresses and all this stuff. It was just insane. And I worked with her and found her completely off-putting. But people like that are typically, they're having their own issues. It's very difficult sometimes to get along with them. But the best way to get along with them a lot of times is to try to avoid them at the firm. And if you can avoid them, that's the best thing. I know of one person that one time was working with someone like that, and then they just went to that partner's boss and said, I can't work with them anymore. They were able to not work with them, and then that person became a partner in the firm that couldn't work with that person. So it depends on how you can deal with it. But if you're unhappy and there's nothing you can do, then leaving is a good thing. The only thing about leaving that I want to bring up is law firms want to make sure that if they're hiring you for a new position, that they think you're going to stay there for a long time. So if you go to this new position and that's really more of the same, then you may be in a position where you look like a job hopper. And every time you leave a job and try to go to another one, the next firm is going to be a little bit nervous about hiring you because they're going to be worried that you won't stay. And so that's just something I would think and try to do. And if there's no way to get along with this partner, then I would certainly encourage you to take the new offer. But I would also see if there's something you can do because maybe just the person just has issues that will go away. I deal with people like this all the time. And I hate it. And I know exactly what you're talking about, dealing with toxic individuals, and it's tough. And I'm sure there's people that think I'm toxic. I'm not, denying that at all. And most of the times when people come across as toxic, they're facing lots of pressures that you wouldn't be aware of, that they're taking it out on you. And that's the problem. It's much better to do specialty work if you want to work in a small market. That's your question. You asked, is it better to do general practice work or specialty work? If you want to work in a large market, most of the jobs in large markets are specialty work. An attorney needs to really craft themselves out as being an expert in something. If you look like a generalist, that can hold you back. Now, if you're in a small market, it's okay to be a generalist, but it's always better, in my opinion, to do specialty work, especially in larger markets. I apologize for such a long answer, but if you have more questions about that, I'm happy to answer them. Okay, this one says, I've been a practicing attorney for almost 7 years now. I've been stuck in a rut doing temporary document attorney review work for a long time now. As you probably know, document attorney review work isn't seen as providing very marketable skills for law firms, and that belief has been confirmed in my own personal experience looking for work, since that was always brought to my attention in whatever law firm interview I went to. Of course, I've realized the limitations of doing solely document review work and did try to do some of my own cases like landlord-tenant and family law cases along with coverage work, but to no avail. I'm obviously going through some transition period where I need to figure out whether the legal profession even makes sense to me or not, and if it doesn't, what else I can do. I would like to know if you can help me untangle the career mess that I'm in. If I continue to be in the legal profession, where do I belong? Is it realistic to be in the legal profession, especially, and then your question got cut off, but I will answer your question. So that's a good question. There's a book, and I think it's by Seth, but it talks about being in a rut, and sometimes it's better to change course. And What you're talking about here is a great question, but the issue is that you brought up is you're not advancing and you're not getting to where you want. Now, I know of one attorney that graduated from UCLA Law School for almost 20 years. He was a contract attorney. He saved up a bunch of money and retired at the age of 40, or 45. He was very young when he went to law school. And so what that means is that you can, certainly have a career doing document review, but is that really something that you're enjoying? Especially if you pass the bar exam, you have legal abilities that you can use. And how do you use those legal abilities? The problem is if you're doing contract work, and especially just document review, that's a job, and that's what you're doing. And I don't know that taking on your own cases. One thing I will say is starting your own law firm and running your own law firm is a very difficult thing to do, especially if you haven't worked with other attorneys that have done it. Now, people do it all the time and are successful, but that's even more difficult because you have to get paid and you have to know the type of clients to take, the type of clients to avoid. And family law cases can be very good, and so nothing's to say you shouldn't be in the legal profession. I mean, you just may be a case of someone that has wound up in the wrong place at the wrong time and wasn't able to get a job. Should you be in the legal profession? If you're enjoying document review, there's nothing wrong with doing it. That's perfectly fine. If you want more and you want to do something else, and doors are going to be difficult to open because you haven't worked in traditional type of legal practice. So you can definitely get a position in a smaller law firm. You've only been out for 7 years, which isn't very long. Plenty of people go to law school in their 50s and all sorts of things and then have careers. So you can certainly transition, but you need to be hungry. That's what I would be most concerned about, is how hungry you are. If you're hungry and you change, you can do well, but you need to be hungry. And the only other thing I would say is, where do you belong? There's lots of practice areas you can get into fairly quickly, and you've actually touched on them. But family law is a very active practice area right now. And I don't know why it's been doing so well, but it's a very active practice area. And if you learn those skills, you can do very well. You can start your own practice. You can do all sorts of things. And if you enjoy family law, I mean, I personally would find it very hard just because of the emotions involved. But if you enjoy it, that's something that I would recommend maybe trying to throw yourself into, because you can make a very good living. I know all sorts of attorneys in California that didn't even go to accredited law schools. And what that means is the law school is basically like online, or a lot of law schools are online, but I'm saying these are not even, they don't have ABA accreditation, the state accredits them, but they're just like night schools and stuff. People come out of those and have extremely successful careers being family lawyers. So that's a great practice area for people to get into if you're confused. And the nice thing about it is it really makes a lot of use of your personality and your ability to relate to people, and the issues for the most part aren't that complex, and you can make a lot of money because people will pay for hourly rates and all sorts of things. So that's one thing I would recommend if you want to do that. No, it's not my position to say you don't belong in the legal profession because you've been a contract attorney, but I will say that one of the things that I've noticed is that doors open very readily for attorneys when you try to go into other types of professions. Attorneys tend to be very good salesmen. They tend to be very thorough in the work that they do and do good work. They tend to understand people very well. The legal profession, in terms of the way you think and analyze information, gives you up compared to a lot of people in other professions. People that are attorneys tend to be fairly resilient and have to concentrate for a long period of time to pass the bar and stuff. So there's a lot of things that you can do where you can be very successful. I gave the example earlier. So as a real estate agent, it was incredible. You can do very well doing that. And so there's a lot of professions like that, and they're not all financial. Something, maybe you're interested in something else. But the point is, you need to get a career. And I'm not sure that if you're not happy being a contract attorney, maybe that's not the best thing for you. But if you have more follow-up questions, I'm happy to answer those as well. Okay, so the next one. Mr. Barnes, thank you for all your interesting articles and webinars. I'm a Spanish lawyer with 10 years of experience in Spain. Currently, I live in Chicago. As a permanent resident, I would like to begin practicing law in the U.S., so I am considering doing an LLM program and taking the bar in Illinois. In your professional opinion, how marketable would I be in a law firm or company taking this path? Would it be necessary to do a JD program? So there are certain states where an attorney can practice law if they're just have an LLM, and I'm not sure that Illinois is one of them. I know that New York and also California are ones, but I would recommend getting a JD. 10 years of experience is a lot of experience, but yes, you would be marketable at a company or a law firm if you were able to get admitted to the bar in Illinois. I think you could work in a variety of companies doing different types of things. It would depend on your experience. I think a law firm is going to be a little bit harder just because of kind of your seniority level, but you could certainly start out as a junior attorney. But I certainly think in Chicago, you would have no problem getting a job in something legal related. I don't see that being a problem. And if you have any follow-ups, let me know. But yes, it would be much easier for you to get a job in a JD program. And I just wanted to make a couple quick observations about LLMs and foreign attorneys. So a lot of U.S. people come over from foreign countries and get LLMs here, and it's very difficult to get a job in the U.S. as a foreign attorney with just an LLM. JD makes it much easier. And the reason is because there's just so many people to do this. They come over here to get LLMs, and it just becomes very difficult to get a job because there's so many people they're competing with. And the three questions, that I talked about earlier, that the law firms are always asking is they're asking, can you do the job? Will you do the job long term? And can you be managed? And so a lot of times, if you're an LLM, they don't know if you're going to stick around. And if you're in terms of doing the job, if you're taught in a different type of system, that can be difficult too. Okay, here's the next question. Yeah, and just keep any questions you guys have. I got all the time in the world to answer questions here for you guys. And I appreciate all these questions. They're good questions. Okay, I'm very close to giving up as an attorney. In law school, I focused my career in energy, minerals, and administrative law. Before and during law school, I had jobs in the oil industry. First as manual labor on the Arctic coast. That's cool. And on an Arctic coast oil field, and later as a contract negotiator. That's awesome. Okay, after law school, I ended up in a boutique firm with a strong focus on Alaska hard rock mining. I'm the Alaskan hard rock mining industry. I've worked with billion-dollar mining companies, large oil companies now. During the low oil prices of oil and gas, and oil and gold about 6 years ago, I was laid off. Yes, that's what happens. Things change. Since then, I've been taking the least desirable jobs or holding myself out by hanging a shingle out of desperation. Consequently, the longest stretch of my career was nearly 1.5 years as a prosecutor working misdemeanors on a remote Indian reservation in North Dakota. To get away from death threats, my wife and I moved to Michigan, where I got licensed in January 2018. Since then, I have opened a law firm, lost $20,000 of my own money, and closed my own practice. Okay, is it possible to get back into corporate law? I don't necessarily need to practice in energy, oil and gas, or mining. My preference would be energy production. But my strong preference is in any corporate practice. Of course, I'll take anything at this point, though. Okay, these are great questions. This is, exactly what I said can happen. Is you can get into the wrong practice area, and then things can change. You had an interest in energy, minerals, and administrative law, and then the market collapsed, and the practice area and all the work went away. So I think it may be starting up again, by the way. I think they may have just authorized some more drilling or something in Alaska or in the Arctic. But to answer your question, you're asking me what you should do. And I think for everyone on this call, this is actually a very good question. And there's a lot here that applies to a lot of people. I want to be very clear, that in here, there's a solution to this question. But the problem is the choices you make with the things that happen to you. So this attorney, you're an energy, minerals, basically an energy attorney, it sounds. What you need to do, anytime something like this that it collapses, there's always going to be work somewhere. You need to do a national search, and you need to find every firm in the country that does that kind of work. There will be several of them. So that's the first thing you should have done. And I'm not saying you've done anything wrong, but that's what I would have done for you if I was working for you, is I would have found every single law firm in the country that does the type of work, because some law firms are going to have that work. So that's the first thing. Then I would also find every single company in the country that does the kind of work that you did and apply to them and to their legal departments. And this is going to require you to use your legal skills and do a lot of research and make sure you're not missing anything and being very thorough. But that you should have, I'm saying this is what I would have done, because you have very niche skills. Now, just because that market's not doing well doesn't mean, that you're not going to do well. You're obviously, a very talented person to have done all these things. To have been laid off is not a big deal, but you need to find all these people that are doing these things. Now, you worked in the gold industry. The gold prices right now are going up dramatically. So you should be applying to firms that work with gold and so forth too. I don't know who those firms are. I don't know that off the top of my hand, but there's going to be people like that. Then you moved to North Dakota and got some trial experience, which is not a bad thing. I'm assuming you were in North Dakota to something to do with your job. I don't know, oil and gas. I don't know, because they do a lot of fracking and stuff there. That actually is not a bad market for the work that you're doing, maybe. But if it was me, I would try to find all these people that were doing the kind of stuff you did before. Working on an Indian reservation, to me, actually sounds very interesting. But and I don't know how you ended up in Michigan. Michigan is a difficult legal market for a lot of people. But if you are in Michigan and you're licensed there, it's a huge state. So you have northern Michigan, you have firms that represent tribes in Michigan and by Bay City and those sort of areas, and you have all of northern Michigan. And the market, what's important for everyone to understand on this call is that the legal market in places to find jobs is huge. In every market, there's thousands of companies, there's thousands of law firms, and there's just lots and lots of people. So the mistake that most attorneys make, and they don't realize this, and everyone on this call, if you feel like you're in danger of losing a job, if you feel like you haven't gotten the job you want, the biggest danger that you can have, or the biggest danger a lot of times, is under marketing yourself. If you have a certain practice area and expertise and you lose your job or you're worried about losing your job, and you need to go and look at every possible place you can, not hold yourself back and interview with everyone you can. If you like something, the attorney before that was been in contract work, and I recommend doing family law. In LA alone, there's probably, and I don't know where you are, but there's probably 750 firms that do family law. Those are all places that could use you potentially, and they will hire you if you apply to them. The same thing with your energy experience. If you apply to those people that do that, they will hire you. Again, a lot of people open their own practice. You can certainly succeed with your own practice, and having your own practice is a good thing that works for a lot of people, and I've seen it work for a ton of people. The only problem with having your own practice is that just brings into mind a whole different set of business skills. You're doing different types of work. You have to learn to find the right clients. You have to get money from them. And that's all possible. But my biggest piece of advice to you is you need to apply everywhere you possibly can. You're not going to get a job probably doing mining law in Michigan, but you might. There's mining in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and in different parts of the state. You need to expand your search. That's my biggest piece of advice. And I don't think giving up because your practice area dies is really the solution at all. The solution when your practice area goes away is to re-market yourself and to figure out, to be resilient, to figure out what is my edge. So if you really want to stay in mining law, then you're going to have to apply everywhere you possibly can and not give up. If you're going to work in Michigan, then you need to figure out every possible place you can work and not give up. And if you want to work on an Indian reservation again, which doesn't sound like you do, then you would want to apply to every Indian reservation. So you need to take what's in front of you and make the most of it. The final thing is going to things like what talks like I'm giving is very good for you, and I would recommend doing that. The other thing that's very good is networking the maximum extent you can. Any type of oil and gas works and so forth for attorneys, you will learn where the opportunities are if you participate in those, and you need to get back into that. But the last thing you should do is give up when your practice area dies and has problems. That's just not something that I would recommend, and something that a lot of people do. And I would encourage you to stick with it. And it's not your fault that oil and gas prices changed and you got laid off. You just have to, keep going. But I would apply everywhere you possibly could. And you need to get out there and meet people and network. I do have on or.com, there's webinars and so forth about networking and how to track down firms in different practice areas. And you need to educate yourself on that. You need to become a student of job search and finding positions, and also you need to become resilient, rise from this. And it's interesting that a couple of the most successful attorneys in this one law firm I'm working with, and with huge books of business, they've been through all this stuff, like with patent litigation dying and then finding new opportunities. And so you need to be an entrepreneur with your career and always go and try to find new places that you can, and new things that you can do and new opportunities. You need to be a student of all this, and that's going to help you. And I hope that helps. Okay. And if you have any follow-up questions, I'm happy to answer them. Any other questions people have, I will just continue answering them. So This one says, my family is relocating to Brattleboro, Vermont for 1 year, beginning this September. My spouse and I are, that sounds fun. My spouse and I are both taking 1 year sabbaticals from our jobs. Okay, good. I'm currently the director of a legal services program in Brooklyn. I'm looking to work while in Vermont. I would like to know if there's a possibility of obtaining temporary or long-term legal work that I can do remotely. For instance, are there New York City firms that outsourcing document review or other tasks can be performed remotely? Yes, there are. Firms do outsource work. If you're currently working in-house, I would think maybe about working on, you could certainly work maybe in a company or organization in Vermont, and I would look for temporary positions you can find online. Law Crossing is a good source of positions, and certainly goes out and finds those, and there's other sources. And there may be other types of work that you want to do too. Maybe you don't want to do legal work. Maybe you could do writing or other types of things. And so there's lots of sources of jobs like Craigslist and things where you potentially could find those types of jobs. Or you could even find a job working inside of a law firm. The nice thing about moving to an area like Brattleboro is there's probably like several smaller law firms or solo practitioners, and they could probably use help with different things. And they always have work in the background. I think that would be fun and probably a nice experience working with someone in a smaller town. And you can always do that, by the way. Anybody that moves to a smaller market, you can almost always find work, especially if you're not, by a threat, you're not looking to, make a huge amount of money and the salary and that sort of thing. That can be helpful. Okay, that was a great question. Thank you. So this is an interesting one. I'm counsel at a large law firm's Warsaw, Poland office. I've spent 1.5 years in their Chicago office as well. I'm thinking of relocating back to the US and wanted to check and see if you were able to provide an honest view of whether or not this may be feasible. In short, I'm a corporate lawyer focusing on global reorganizations, post-acquisition integrations, pre-sale carve-outs. I also have good M&A experience, but this comes from the local market, hence maybe less relevant in the US. I'm based in Chicago. I worked managing reorganizations as a regional coordinator. I was thinking of preparing for the California bar before I start my job search. Do you think finding a proper placement for me is doable? Just to mention, my Warsaw predecessor moved to London and works in the global reorganizations for a major firm. Many thanks in advance. I look forward to hearing from you. So, yeah, so I mean, it sounds like you're a U.S. attorney and you moved to Warsaw, which is an interesting market. My dad actually worked there in the 1990s when it was coming back. Okay, I'm thinking of relocating back. So is it feasible? So yes, it is feasible. It sounds like you have a very specific type of experience. You need to find a law firm that has that type of work. That's really all there is to it. So that's what your predecessor did. And it's good that you have that type of experience. A lot of it is going to be, hopefully will be transferable to a US firm. The only thing that concerns me, I don't know, you certainly can take the California bar. I don't know how appropriate that would be though before you get a job, but you can take it. It's a hard exam, especially if you're studying it remotely, and you will have to. Most people that pass it spend at least 5 or 6 weeks doing nothing but studying for it, which kind of stinks. If you have that time, then you can do it. Chicago, returning there. I don't know if your law firm would allow you to return. That's usually the best thing that you can do is return. But someone in your situation, you can find a position. To answer your question, the biggest thing is going to be finding someone that needs someone with your exact type of experience. And where is that? And maybe that is in California. I don't know. I'm not looking at like a database and stuff right now, but I would recommend trying to find, the first thing would be your current firm. Then the next thing would be another US-based firm that does the same type of work. That would be how I would approach it. If you do find a firm like that, you can approach them in a couple different ways. It might be interesting, if I was in your situation, to try to make contact with a partner in a firm that does that type of work and maybe strike up a conversation and ask them how busy they are and if they know anybody with work and that sort of thing. That would be how I would go about doing the search if I was you. Recruiters may have some opportunities as well. I may have opportunities, I don't know, but I would think that if you were effectively networking, you really could do fairly well doing that. But the first thing is obviously you always want to try your own firm. So if you have any more questions, just let me ask them. That's a great question, though, and I appreciate it. Let's see. Okay, let's see here. I just read your article on the top 10 reasons to start or not start your own law firm. I think you made some great points about the pros and cons of opening your own law firm. As I suspected, it seems like most solid law firms fail and are started for the wrong reasons. Mostly they couldn't get a job anywhere else. After reading your article, I'm trying to figure out a career path that makes sense for me. Unfortunately, I've never worked at a traditional law firm for any long periods of time since those opportunities never really panned out for me. Instead, I've been mostly working as a contract attorney, taking on document review and coverage work. I like the flexibility and decent pay of doing this line of work, and yes, it can pay fairly well. It's boring, or fairly, frankly, boring and unfulfilling. It's just something I do to earn a paycheck every week, nothing more. I feel like I need a job that stimulates my brain some more, and that does not make me feel like a robot at work. I wouldn't mind working at a regular law firm. The issue is that they don't see my background doing contract work, and even some of my own cases was good enough for them. It's the same interview I've ever done for a law position in a law firm. What do you think makes the most sense for me? Try to go to the latter to the document review world or transition to something else, even if it means leaving law altogether. Thank you for your help on this, and I'm curious to see your thoughts on my situation. Okay, that's a great question about starting your own law firm. So anybody can start a law firm, and there's nothing wrong with starting a law firm, and you certainly can succeed at a law firm. The problem with starting a law firm is you need to have a plan. You need to know what you want to do, and you need to be firm about that. You could start a law firm, for example. You probably know a lot more about document review and how document reviews work and so forth than most people in the country. So you could literally start a law firm that does nothing but document review for companies and law firms. That could be a law firm. And the problem is everybody that starts a law firm needs to, have some sort of business that they do. So it could be family law, it could be trust and estates, it could be all sorts of things. You could go and you could learn about trust and estates. You just need to have a business. A business, generally you can't just open a restaurant. If you open a restaurant, it needs to be like Tex-Mex, or it needs to be a Chinese restaurant, or it needs to be some sort of restaurant. You can't just have a restaurant. You want to have, and it's the same thing with a business. You typically can't just have a business. It's got to be doing something. So if you want to start a law firm, you can. You could also probably start a huge business, massive, doing document review. If you have a special way of doing that and you understand that, and you should look at what's in front of you sometimes. Yes, law firms typically, it is much harder to get a job as a contract attorney working in a law firm after you've been a contract attorney. And that stinks. I don't like it any more than you do. And people become contract attorneys and do documents for all sorts of reasons. The only problem with that is the law firm just assumes that you're not as interested in it, or they assume you may have picked up some bad habits, and they just don't see you in the right way. So my advice to you would be, one, think about what you've been doing in document review, that as a business. If you really do want to get a job in a law firm, the only way to do that typically is to find someone that has a law firm and has the work to take an interest in you and take a liking to you. And I have more stories than I can tell about how stuff like that happens. I know one attorney that graduated, I think, from like Seton Hall and was in the middle of his class and used to walk his dog every morning and to a dog park. And there was another guy that did it, and that guy ended up being a partner at a major law firm, and he got a job that way. So most of the time, which is crazy because he didn't have a job, and it was a job as an associate, and he'd never been a summer associate anywhere or anything. He just was unemployed after law school. Things can happen, but you need to get out there and meet people, and you need to be willing to settle when you start for something that doesn't pay a lot. And then you need to watch what's going on around you and the environment and get the best job you can. And that would be my advice. A lot of times, the opportunities that you don't see, there's two different types of firms. There's ones that are consumer facing, and there's ones that are company facing. The ones that are company facing, meaning that work for companies, are going to be the hardest ones if you're just trying to get a job as an associate or do something. The ones that are consumer facing, meaning they work for consumers, are going to be the easiest. So that's things like personal injury, consumer bankruptcy, family law, anything that's consumer facing is going to be much easier to get a job in than something that's not. So if you can start out a consumer facing position, learn skills there, then you can always move on. So that's my suggestion. If you have any follow-up questions, I'm happy to help you too, because that's a very good question. Okay, let's see. Okay, I'm expecting to make a lateral move as soon as possible after graduation. As you recommended in your article, I'm trying to be proactive in seeking employment assistance. I'm from Central Illinois and went to Northwestern for undergrad and now Columbia for law school. OCI, that's great. OCI for 2L was a disaster because I really didn't know what I was doing, which is very common. I now have a pending offer with a New York firm. Wow. And perhaps a second by the end of this week. But I'd recommend I would be back in Chicago. Also, my offer is with a firm that by all accounts is not very well respected, though very high paying. I'm concerned their reputation will make it difficult for me to find alternative employment after working there. I know you generally don't handle entry-level applicants, but I'm looking for advice more than anything, and I think you can help me better understand the consequences of these decisions. Okay, so these are great questions. Okay, so I'm assuming, so you would, I just want to see if I understand. Central Maryland, Northwestern, also Columbia Law School, OCI, 9 Okay, so I don't know if you're a 2L or a 3L. I'm assuming you're a 3L. And OCI, that's, yeah, you're right. People don't know what they're doing. It's just a skill that kind of comes along later. A lot of attorneys that go straight through don't have very good interview skills early on and don't take it that seriously. And even if you go to a top, law school like Columbia, they don't do well. And that's very common. I've known lots of people that actually came out of law school without offers. So New York is much easier to get a job in than Chicago, especially if you're working in going to school in New York. So I had a similar experience. I went to Chicago for undergrad. I'm from the Midwest. I wanted to go back to Chicago, and it was very easy for me to get offers in New York and so forth. And Chicago, they just weren't a lot of people coming to my law school, which was Virginia for OCI. I didn't really have any opportunities there, which I was disappointed in, and I would have gone there certainly over New York. But so not working in Chicago is actually an okay thing. There's articles I've written online about the advantages of working in a New York law firm. People that get jobs in New York law firms and work there tend to come out with a lot of confidence. There's just a different tolerance for, the pace, the type of work people do. It's actually very good to work in New York for at least several years out of law school. It'll make you a better attorney. And if you keep your wits about you, you can always go back to Chicago after a couple of years. The fact that the firm is high paying is a good thing. If they're paying a lot of money, that means that they're bringing in a lot of revenue and they're doing good work. Every law firm out there has negative things that people are saying about it. Everyone is just psyching everyone out. It's no different than TMZ or People Magazine or whatever. I mean, it's just, there's always going to be bad news about law firms. Law firms are like people. Some of them are popular at different points in time, and other times they're not. So don't get too sucked in. There's not a lot for you to go on when you're young and you're trying to learn, but don't get too sucked in negative news and so forth. I don't know how bad the law firm is, but obviously if they have a negative reputation for something, that's not something that's good. But I don't think most of the time negative reputations don't last unless the firm goes out of business. Then that can hurt you. So I don't think I would really care too much about that. I think you're very fortunate to have a good job right now that pays a lot. I think you're also fortunate that you may be getting another job. I think you've probably learned about how to interview. And anybody that's in law school reading this, I mean, you really do need to do a lot of reading. I have books and stuff on our website. Also, there's presentations about interviewing but you need to really learn about interviewing and how to do well at that because it can make a big difference. But there's not, the big thing is in terms of your law firm is the kind of experience you're getting. I don't know what kind of practice area you're going into, but if your law firm has a really good reputation for your practice area, that's a very positive thing too. I just wouldn't worry too much about the reputation. If they're paying full market, high market, then they're obviously successful financially. But if you're more comfortable with the other firm you may get an offer from, then I would recommend going there. The final thing is, the most important thing when picking a firm is not necessarily their reputation. That may be an important thing for the law schools you choose and so forth. The most important thing for the firm is how comfortable you feel with the people there, how much you actually like the firm. And if you like that firm and the people there and you feel comfortable like you could do well there in the long run, then that's a much better thing than not. Okay, let's see. Is medical health law a lucrative practice area? Any suggestions for transition in this practice area? Yes, that is a very good practice area, and it's been doing well for a long time. I think the best way to transition this practice area, one of the things is obviously to try to get a job with a law firm that does it. Another way to transition into that practice area is to, sometimes if you're a fairly junior attorney, there are LLM programs. I think that they're pretty decent. It's a good idea sometimes to do that for health law. I've seen people come out of those and get positions, but also you can transition that practice area many times by going to work in government-related positions and then working there for a year or two and then transitioning to a law firm after doing that. Ideally, if you really are enthusiastic about it, I'm just telling you patterns that I've seen that have worked for people. I've seen people go to work for the government or in-house into a hospital or something along those lines, and then get an LLM while doing that, and then come out and work in major law firms. It is a good practice area. It's good because it's just a very active part of the economy, and there's just a lot of money flowing into that, and not a lot of people that understand it. Okay, let's see here. Hello, I'm considering transitioning from a corporate practice to a litigation practice. Currently, I'm a clerk in the Illinois Appellate Court. I began my legal career clerking for the Indiana Supreme Court. After clerking, I joined the commercial financing practice, a commercial finance group of Cat & Muchin. Even after my first clerkship, I expected that I might enjoy litigation more than I previously expected, and I still believe I am correct in that. My clerkship is ending in December. How feasible is the transition to litigation? Yes, it is feasible to transition to litigation. As I said earlier, there's people that enjoy writing and reading and massaging language and so forth, and there's people that enjoy corporate type practice. And if you feel that you would enjoy that type of practice more, then I certainly would recommend looking at litigation positions as well. The problem is Chicago is a little bit of a tight legal market right now, but that's okay. But I would look at firms in Chicago and then maybe other markets, especially if you're from outside Chicago. I would look at those markets, see what you can do there. I would also apply to as many places as you possibly can to do litigation and try it that way. I don't know that using a recruiter would be appropriate at this point, but you could certainly use a recruiter, or you could do it on your own. There's a list of top litigation firms in BCG that you could look at and apply to in whatever cities you're interested in. But yeah, if you're interested, I would plan on going back to Catlin if you have an open offer. But at the same time, and because the market's not that great, you could also even potentially talk to them about transitioning practice areas. But before you talk to them about doing that, I would be careful and hopefully talk to some firms and try to at least have whatever backup plan, if that makes sense. I hope that helps. But yeah, I mean, if you're unhappy in a certain type of practice area, it always makes sense to try to do another one. Okay, I was referred to BCG attorney search from a friend. I'd like to know how your office works and what the common procedures involved in recruitment. I currently live in Orange County. However, no, the legal market is not as stable as it once was, and I'm open to relocating. Actually, the legal market right now is very good. It's just the legal market tends to slow down in smaller law firms that have higher cost structures when the economy is not doing well. But the legal market's actually doing just fine, and we've been very busy. There's a bunch of articles on BCG about how it works when you work with our company, what we do. But essentially, we have legal placement professionals. They work with candidates. Those legal placement professionals I review their work with them in person at least twice a month, and then they have weekly meetings, and there's quite a bit that goes into it. So anybody that works with anyone in our company, I have a role in it as well. And we work with a limited number of people. But the market's actually, if you're in Orange County, I don't know what your practice area is, but the market in Orange County is actually very good right now. I don't think you'll have too much problem, especially in Orange County. Orange County's always been very good, especially for litigation. Okay, Harrison, thank you for the work you do to bring greater insights in the legal market. What advice would you give for second career attorneys who have 10 years of experience in, say, finance? I don't know that I think that having extra experience in finance is good. I think that people from finance backgrounds that go into the practice of law do very well in corporate related law. So if you can do that, would be helpful. And people have very good second careers in practicing law. It's a great career to do, a great job to do many times as a second career. Okay, let's see here. I'm going to take I'll be back in 1 second. I'm going to just grab something here for the notes. Just 1 second. Okay, sorry about that. Give me 1 second to switch my screen. Okay, so here's the next question let's see. And again, ask as many questions as you've got. These are great questions, and I have all the time to answer them that you guys need. I said, next question is, I've worked with lots of Napoleonic personalities and have had bad experiences in many different legal environments that I could write a book on. But I'm left with a sense of PTSD. I know whether to stay with the devil, or try to make a move for happiness. If there are no firm reviews, how do you decide who might not be a good employer? Yeah, so a lot of people have very serious PTSD from working in law firms. It's very difficult for people, and people really can be scarred, and all sorts of bad things can happen because of working in the wrong firm. And yeah, so it's not necessarily an easy thing. And if you go to a law firm and you work with people that you're comfortable with, that's typically the best thing. And then you need to figure out what is the cause of the stress. And so sometimes the cause of the stress, you could be working with people that are maybe far more detail oriented than you're comfortable being, or people that are, you just don't know. I don't know what the issues are, but typically it's that your issues are going to be with a person that you work with. Being happy with a person you work with is going to make the most difference to how happy you are wherever you are. So you need to have someone you connect, and it needs to be a personality that you're comfortable with. And that's really the biggest thing that I can say, is to just try to find someone that has the type of personality that you feel like a good match, and a firm that has a type of personality. And there's all sorts of different personalities in firms. I mean, some are very formal, some are informal, some are made up of Democrats, some are made up of Republicans, some are made up, it just depends. You need to find the right group, type of person to you. When you interview there, you need to get a sense of what the people are like, or you need to avoid those type of people where you're at. So that's the best advice I can give. If you have any follow-up questions, I hope I give a good answer. I'm happy to answer them. Okay. And last week's Q&A, you said that tax lawyers think differently. I'm a tax lawyer, and I'm curious to know, how do tax lawyers think differently than other lawyers, in your opinion? I think that tax law, the thought process tends to be quite logical, and I think that people often will come back to the code's always in the background, and then is very centered to the analysis, and then how they come back to the code and the way they're looking at problems and reaching solutions is quite interesting. And usually the difference between the right and wrong is very clear. I just think that the way that tax lawyers think is a certain type of logic. It's a very kind of organized form of thinking compared to the way a lot of people think in other practice areas. That's my opinion. I do think that there's a certain type of personality that practices tax law and that's good at it. That's kind of my opinion. So I hope that helps. But it's an interesting practice area. And if you like it, I think it's a lot of fun. I certainly liked it a lot. Can you just briefly discuss the biggest challenges for transitioning from a law firm to in-house work and how to address them? So I've written several articles about going in-house on BCG Search, and you guys can look at those if you like. Those articles, typically, they talk about some of the drawbacks of going in-house as opposed to working in a law firm. But the biggest challenges of transitioning from law firm to in-house is when you're in a law firm, you're dominated by the economic model of the firm, and that means that the number of hours you bill and that sort of thing tends to be most important, or the amount of businesses that you have. When you go to work inside of a company, you're not you're not necessarily a profit center, you become a cost center. And what I don't like about in-house jobs sometimes is that they can be very political. Companies go through different types of CEOs, and most CEOs want to have their own legal team because they have people that they trust and have their back. And so a lot of times you can be out of jobs in smaller companies every time the management changes. The other thing I don't like about in-house for attorneys a lot of times is companies go out of business, they grow, they shrink and stuff very quickly, whereas a law firm is a very stable business model that's been around for a long time. So a lot of times attorneys have that problem. The other thing is that when you transition from a law firm to in-house, your job most of the time is going to be, protecting the company from things that can go wrong. You have the kind of attention inside of companies. There's people that are trying to make money and get the company to do things, and sometimes those things are questionable. And then there's the legal department that's trying to prevent them from doing things that are going to get the company in trouble. And so that becomes your role. So if the company does get in trouble, typically the legal department, or a lot of people there, anybody that saw anything will lose their job. If the legal department, and then the people in the legal department are always trying to prevent the trouble, they're not necessarily liked all the time by the management of the company. And so you almost feel like an outsider in the organization and not like your resident person that has bad news all the time. So those are some of the things I don't like about working in-house. And those are the biggest challenges. And there's a lot of very good things, but the law firm personality all the time doesn't necessarily do that well. And I see attorneys all the time. I've seen attorneys go in-house and something happens that they didn't even have anything to do with, and they get sued for malpractice. Just all sorts of crazy things happen in-house. And the same thing happens in law firms. I'm not saying that they're any different. But if you have a lot of training working in a law firm, it can be very hard. And I've seen some of the most talented attorneys in the country, not in the country, but I take some of the highest profile in-house jobs imaginable, and they take them and have issues. The best way to address them is to go to a company where you feel comfortable, where you feel like there's people around you that may support you, where you are working with peers that are people that you feel comfortable with. And then the big thing, though, for most in-house things, I would say, is to ask who your predecessors were and what happened to them and why they're not there. And if you start getting a lot of weird looks and stories, it may not be a good place. You want to look for a place where there's stability. And the thing is, the positive of all this is that there are some exceptional, very good in-house jobs. And in fact, a good portion of them are very good, but you need to find them. And the thing that concerns me about in-house is that when I see people's resumes that have gone in-house many times, what I see is I see them moving every couple of years to another in-house job, and it just seems a problem. They're always moving jobs, and because of that, I think they're moving jobs a lot because the jobs can be very political, and there can be a lot of problems associated with them. So I would review my article, but the best way to address those problems is really to find the best place for you. And sometimes large legal departments can be very good places where you can be comfortable and have a long-term career. It just depends on where you go. Okay, this next question. By the way, ask as many questions as you want. I know everyone's been here a while, but I will answer questions or follow-up questions, whatever you guys have, as many questions as anyone has, and I will do my best to help you today. Okay, let's see. I am concerned about having a spotty resume, one-year stints at jobs, and moving between states. Can you omit jobs and resumes that do not assist you? No, you shouldn't be admitting jobs. If you're a full-time employee there, no, you should never admit jobs. There's nothing wrong with having a one-year stint at a place, and even several of them, you can still be employable if you're in the right practice area. I've seen people before leave jobs out, and sometimes like they may have gone to a firm and only been there 3 weeks and then gone back to their existing firm or something along those lines. This is all questionable. Certainly, I'm not going to tell you to lie in your resume or remove things. I think one of the things that people do that is actually, I don't see anything wrong with, is when they have the resume, they may, have something depending on where you're, oh, by the way, your education and stuff goes at the top your first 5 years, and then after 5 years, you put the education at the bottom. And you put other stuff at the bottom too, but your experience goes at the top after 5 years. But you could do something where you could put legal experience. And if you've had jobs that aren't legal jobs, then you don't really have to list them. You just list your legal jobs, and that may be one way to answer that question. And if they ask you about your other jobs, you can list your other experience, but you could have separate areas for legal experience, or you could have, if you were an associate, you could put associate experience or something, but you typically have to put all your legal experience on there. Hope that helps. Okay, let's see here. Harrison, do AmLaw 100 law firms pay crevasse scale? If not, can you provide any negotiation tips in this economic market? As a firm I'm interviewing, really needs my skills and my practice here. Yeah, so if a firm pays half the crevasse scale or even 60, 70% of it, the odds of them coming up to the crevasse scale are pretty slim. A lot of the reason the firms that pay the crevasse scale can do that is because of their billing rates. So if your billing rates are going to be similar to what associates at your level are billing, then there's certainly nothing wrong with asking for the crevasse scale. If the law firm really needs you, then they will come up in their salary. I don't see law firms budging more than 10 to 15% the majority of the time in salary negotiations. They certainly will, but anytime they go too far, you're in danger. As a general rule, it's important to remember that law firms, if you figure out what your billing rate is and you ask them that, the most law firms can pay you is about 30 to 35% of whatever the revenue you're bringing in is and your expected revenue, and even maybe a little bit less because they could lose work and all sorts of things could happen. Law firms need to pay you about 1/3. So everything always drifts towards that. Say you were like 8th-year associate in a major law firm, you might be billing, let's say, $1,000 an hour, which is $2 million a year, which they're not going to pay you $650,000. But honestly, some firms would pay you $450 or $500. The salaries these days are insane. But the point is that you need to really understand what your billing rate is going to be. If they really do need you, then they will hire you. But you need to understand, that. And once you understand that, you can negotiate. But as a general rule, law firms will not budge more than 10 or 15%. There's also problems if you're being paid more than other associates, because if you're being paid more than other associates in the firm, then that's going to potentially create issues. So thanks. Okay, so let's see. Great discussion. Interested in some suggested outlets or interesting stories you've heard about others moonlighting between law and some other interests. Yeah, people do things all the time. I've seen people start businesses while they're practicing law. This particular business, I actually started when I was practicing law. To it, you certainly should do what you're interested in, and yeah. But I've heard tons of stories about people doing other things, and it is pretty funny. The funniest story I guess I can tell you this about moonlighting, if you want to hear it quick. I mean, I'm going to go back and answer questions, but I had a case about a year ago where I was working with an attorney. He said that he needed to take his wife to the doctor twice a week. He told the firm that hired him that he needed to do that, and that was a requirement. It turned out that he was a patent litigator at a major New York law firm in the Bay Area. He was actually working full time as an engineer, making a very good salary in addition to working in the law firm at the same time. So his excuse for taking his wife to the doctor was because he needed to go into the office as an engineer twice a week too. That's a pretty interesting story about moonlighting. And when I found that out, I was astonished. Okay, so is accepting a staff attorney position at an AmLaw 100 law firm a career dead end? No, absolutely not. A staff attorney position at an AmLaw 100 law firm is not a career dead end. It also depends on your practice area. Many practice areas like trademark law, for example, some AmLaw 100 law firms will only hire associates as staff attorneys. They don't even have, it just depends on the practice area. You can also, many times people during recessions, the law firms will bring in staff attorneys to do it. But is it a good idea? Generally not, because advancement is going to be difficult. Some law firms will advance staff attorneys to attorneys if you do a really good job. So if you really put in a major effort and you're doing very well, then they can advance you. Other law firms won't. But no, it's not necessarily a dead end. But all things considered, you're typically going to be better off taking a job in a law firm that's not an AmLaw 100 law firm as an attorney, as a associate, and not a staff attorney than you would be as a staff attorney. The problem being a staff attorney many times is you're not going to be given the best writing assignments. You're not going to have the opportunity to go to court as much. You're not going to be as present in deals and negotiating them and so forth. Whereas in a smaller law firm, you may not get the prestige of working in a major law firm, but you're going to get better experience and it's going to develop you more as an attorney. So that would be my recommendation. And also, can you move to a better firm after that? I was working with a girl not too long ago in Washington, D.C., and she really wanted to go in a major law firm. And she was working in a smaller law firm and got an offer to work as a staff attorney in a major firm. Was ecstatic. She felt like that was the best thing that ever happened to her because she just really wanted to get a big firm on her resume. I'm not saying that was a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, for her, it was the best thing that could have happened. And she wanted to get out of working in a small law firm. It's all dependent on you and what is important to you. But in my opinion, you're better off working at a firm where there may be more possibility for upward mobility, even if there's not getting paid as much money. Okay, next question. And guys, you can keep asking questions. I'll keep answering. I know I've answered a lot, but I will keep answering these questions. Let's see here. What's your advice on transitioning from litigation to in-house? I'm a third-year attorney. It's difficult to transition many times in litigation to working in-house, but the longer you do litigation partners many times will transition to being managers of the litigation of their company, in-house jobs. There's in-house jobs inside of insurance companies. There's all sorts of litigation jobs inside of companies. Also, many times companies will have their own in-house litigators. But the big thing is that it's actually much more difficult to transition from litigation to an in-house job as opposed to transitioning. It's much more difficult to transition to a litigation job, an in-house litigation job, than it would be to transition if you're in the corporate market. So my advice of how to do that would be really just keep your eye open for opportunities all the time. Many times also what will happen is if you're working, depending on the size firm you're at, if you're in a smaller firm or a mid-sized firm, a lot of times they will actually have attorneys that are in-house, the attorneys that are representing them on the outside can go to work at the companies that they're working for. And happens quite a bit. So I hope that helps. Okay, let's see, next one. Do you think law firms will ever move away from the billable hour model and consider flat rate or bundled billing? Yeah, a lot of law firms do that. Like I said, they do it in patent prosecution. They do it in a lot of different things. But the problem with the flat rate billing is law firms are afraid of getting burned and working too much on stuff. And then the way Murphy's Law kind of works is when they have done that in the past, a lot of times cases won't settle, often in litigation, or things will get dragged out. And I don't think that law firms will ever move away from the bill of hour model. It used to be, the bill of hour, by the way, is a relatively new invention for law firms. So it used to be law firms would just send a bill to people based on how much work they thought they had done. And so it's not uncommon for people to take a look at a file and see like how big it was and send a bill based on that. And so lawyers started realizing that when they did that, they lost a lot of money. So there's all these, it's very interesting, but if you study the history of the law firms, which of course is what I do for a living, the billable hour is a relatively new invention. And they only did it because they figured that it was because they realized that when you started taking track of every piece of time you billed, you would make a lot more money. That is how it works these days. So no, I don't think they're ever going to go away with it. I think that they proved that the law firms that do the billable hour are the most likely to be profitable. And the attorneys, if they don't do it, aren't. So I don't think they'll ever go away. Okay, let's see here. I am in the midst of a job search, and I am hoping you might be able to provide some advice or direction. My girlfriend has moved to Los Angeles for work, and I'm hoping to follow as soon as I can, as we're about to have our first child, but I'm having difficulty in my search. I'm an experienced managing attorney of the Department of the Navy, but I realize that I am at a disadvantage being currently not licensed in California. I fully intend on taking the bar, but still need to find something before then. Do you have any suggestions or leads I can follow? Is there any temporary contract review or litigation support positions to be secure staffing for? My current role requires me to answer complex claims questions on behalf of the Navy, negotiate settlements with insurance companies and plaintiffs' attorneys, ensure compliance with all matter of privacy rules, and many other things as needed. Additionally, I've experienced reviewing, analyzing, and drafting many different types of agreements from my time as a legal clerk. And my concentration on law school, I understand this is kind of a shot in the dark, but any assistance you may provide would truly be so appreciated. Please let me know if you see my resume. I believe I've submitted your firm via the website. Okay, thanks. That's a good question. So the first thing is I would try to continue working with the Navy. If you continue working with the Navy, I don't think you will need to have any type of bar exam in California. Your other option would be to work in-house. If you're an in-house attorney, you don't need to have the bar exam. You can be admitted without the California bar exam. And there's certainly plenty of insurance companies and so forth, which it looks like you do quite a bit of already. So I would try to do that. That to me seems like the most logical thing. The first is working, there's military bases and so forth around Los Angeles. I'm assuming that they could potentially hire you. But the other thing is in-house jobs, I think would be the best. And then if you do want to take the bar exam, that's fine. And then you can become admitted and potentially practice with a law firm. The only issue you're going to run into there is it's difficult transitioning from the military many times to a law firm. And especially the longer you've been doing that. And it's just because people pick up different types of habits and so forth in the military than they may. And it's the same thing with going in-house to law firms. So law firms typically hire from other law firms. So I would really recommend, but that's not to say you couldn't get a job. A lot of these questions today have been about potentially transitioning practice areas and so forth and or doing different types of work. But I would recommend, if it was me, I would recommend trying to work in a other law firm if it was in-house or staying with the government. I hope that helps. And if you don't want to do that, then applying to firms that do insurance work after you're admitted to the bar. Okay, let's see here. Okay, a couple more questions. And yeah, if anybody has any more, there's about several questions left, but any other questions you can think of or follow up. I'm back at a firm, but when I was in-house counsel, executives told me I was a great attorney and was unbelievable in business and dealing with people. I was told I should go into business and management. How should you suggest I switch industries? I'm older in my career, original background was in business. I would just, if you're at a law firm and you want to go into business, depending on what type of company you were in the past, I would try to maybe work in those type of companies. Basically the type of companies, if you're working with certain clients right now, I would potentially talk to them and then try to network. If you're really hungry to do something, even if you're older in your career, you can do it. But you want to always do something that is close to what you've been doing before. So that was how I would handle that, if that makes sense. Let me just see. Would you suggest to switch industries? Yeah, I don't know if you want to switch industries, but if you're interested in business, I would try to get into business. You can always go into anything to do with consulting and sales and things like that. There's always positions for that if you like that. Even what I do for a living requires you to deal with a lot of people in this sort of a business job. Okay, let's see here. With all the recession happening, the Bay Area has always come back with renewed valuations, even today doing well in big tech. Is it more insulated than other areas? Yeah, Bay Area has always done very well. In terms of California, it's just a great market. It's always been a good market. The issue with the Bay Area is there's just a lot of venture capital coming in there and a lot of people make money. And then there's a lot of companies that are supported with outside money. And then a lot of companies have become very successful. And then there's also a lot of engineering and other types of talent. So yeah, the Bay Area has always been a good area. Still, you're right, doing well in big tech. And it is insulated, yes. But at the same time, for corporate work, it can slow down. It's been doing well recently because of the stock market, and the stock market continues to go up. But anytime something like that takes a hit, the Bay Area will take a hit. But yeah, it's a very good market, especially for corporate and patent type related work there. And I do believe it's quite insulated, yes. Okay, here's an interesting question. So for a frame of reference, I am a 40-year-old woman, Black, a mom with young kiddos, and recently graduated from law school. About to sit both the bar and the patent bar exam. I majored in molecular biology as an undergraduate. I have an MBA and a 15-year plus background in corporate finance and management consulting. I relate well to people and I'm eloquent and good. How do I present myself to law firms? You've advised that we shouldn't brag about our experience because we need the law firm job and we should come across as ready to do the work in anything we're asked, all of which I am to gain experience. How do I present at the interview? How do I present as an experienced stellar candidate? Or which firms are amenable to candidates like myself? Do I even need to really gun for a large law firm? Would it be crippling for me not to have large law firm experience? Would I be better off to set up a solo practice or management consulting? Okay, so this is a great question. So if you're sitting for the bar exam, the patent bar exam, and 40 is not old. You can definitely get a position, I would say, as a patent attorney doing biotech patent type work once you take the patent bar. And that's a very good practice area to be in. There are certain cities that are better for molecular biotype attorneys, and those are Boston, San Diego is good, in a few other areas. Orange County is actually okay around the country for patent attorneys doing that. And if you want to be a patent attorney, you can always get positions doing that. You can get a position with a law firm, or you can even get a position with a USPTO, which is a good place to get training. And it's a government position, and you could have a good career there as well. Or you could potentially try to get a job in-house. I would recommend the law firms and the PTO, and also very small law firms. Typically, what happens with patent attorneys is they come out of school, and a lot of them don't get good grades because they don't go to the best law schools because they major in sciences and things where it's difficult to get good grades. And in order to get in the best law schools, you typically need great grades. And so they come out and they work for smaller law firms, and then they transition to larger law firms later. I don't think there's anything wrong with bragging. There's also a major dearth of African-American patent prosecutors. It tends to be, obviously, not a lot of women go into it, and then certainly not a lot of African-American women or people of other backgrounds, or simply also not a lot of older people. So I would think you would get a fairly good reception, especially once you take the patent bar. Having experience in corporate finance and management consulting would also make you a very good corporate attorney, perhaps, so you could apply for corporate positions. I don't know. I personally, based on everything I've told you today about practicing law, I might actually prefer to be working in management consulting. That could be very interesting. It seems like you would have a lot to offer. And typically when you're young, and when I say young, when you're starting out in your career in a law firms are really, the reason I seem not to brag and come across as dollars, there's two types of people they're looking for. They're looking for people that are soldiers, meaning people that can do the work. And then they're looking for generals. And generals are people that are bringing in work and telling people what to do and leading other attorneys and so forth. So when you're starting up your career, you need to be a soldier. And that's one of the reasons a lot of times that it's harder for older attorneys, because they're used to being generals. And the soldier is just someone who follows orders and does what they're told and puts their head down and works hard. And then you'll be evaluated based on your background. So there's nothing saying you should be duller. And what I'm actually saying is you need to come across as a soldier and not necessarily a general. So that's how I would approach that. And it's not crippling to not have large law firm experience. I would think that you would be a good candidate for a large law firm, but you need to decide what you want to do. And if you're taking the patent bar, it sounds like you may want to be a patent attorney. One question I would ask you, just think you should think about, is do you want to be a patent attorney or do you want to be a corporate attorney? If you take the patent bar, you're going down the road of being a patent attorney. The problem with doing that is that you only have an undergraduate in molecular biology. And a lot of patent attorneys are expected to have PhDs or master's degrees. So that's going to limit you to some extent out of the gate. And the other thing is most of the opportunities in patent law are for electrical engineers. So it's much harder to get a job doing biotech related work. So that may actually hurt you to some extent. And then the fact is, for the past 15 years, you've been doing corporate finance and management consulting, and you also have an MBA. So it seems to me like your interest really lies in business, and that's maybe where you should be focusing yourself on business as opposed to doing something else. So that would be my advice. Certainly you have to do what you're best at, but I would think that maybe you could do better with corporate because of 15 plus years of experience and an MBA. That's a lot than something else. Hope that helps. Okay, let's see. My typical case, joined a law firm as an intern, served 80% of my clients. Mine is a typical case where I joined a law firm as an intern and served 80% of clients. Picked up by one other client with 4 times the pay, another job 2 times, next time 2 times, next job at 2 times. Wow. Okay, so your question is, just keep making all this money. This is incredible. Should I concentrate on pay or brand names and stay back with loyalty and pay increases? If somebody's paying you twice as much, I'm sorry, but God, I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know. I don't think anybody on this call would say that there's anything wrong with taking a job that pays twice as much. That's just, those are huge increases. And that was actually a mistake. But I'll tell you one thing that I did is I was at a firm that I liked quite a bit called Quinn Emanuel. And this is a long time ago. And we're talking 20 plus years ago and maybe 25. And back then the salaries were quite low. I was making $85,000 a year, I think. Then there were 2 firms in Los Angeles. They were both New York firms. One of them was Dewey Valentine and the other was SCADA. And we're paying these outrageous rates. I think they were paying over $150 for people that were my class year. And I actually jumped and went over to Dewey to make that much money, which everyone in my current firm thought was incredible. But it was a mistake because it wasn't a sustainable business model that they had. I didn't like the people as much. I was just moving for money. But the idea is if you're working with people that you're comfortable with and you feel have your back, it's that much more money, then it's something I would seriously consider. I can't believe you're getting these raises. I can see getting 4 times, but twice as much and twice as much and twice as much is great. I don't know that's typical at all. But if someone offers you twice as much as you're making, I would not take that lightly. But you need to find a place where you feel like you can settle down, have a long-term career. There's an article on BCG called Find Your Tribe, and I would recommend reviewing that. And I think that's the most important. You want to be at a place where you're happy. And we've talked so much today about people having all these problems and being in situations where they're not happy and working with people where it's not pleasant. And so I think you need to be very careful about what you do. If you find people that you like, then that can be very valuable. Let's see. Do attorneys with MBA get hired on good management positions and non-experience on the business side? Makes sure go for attorneys. So yeah, getting an MBA is a very good thing for attorneys. Most attorneys that get MBAs end up in going to, a lot of times they'll go to law firms as corporate attorneys afterwards. But the thing is, one of the things I've noticed that when people come out of MBA programs, especially with several years of experience, they typically will make a lot more money than attorneys, people just coming directly out of MBA programs. So that's something to think about. I would recommend if you really want to get an MBA and it's interesting to you, then you should do it. But an MBA doesn't necessarily teach you all the skills necessary to be a business person. If you're interested in business, though, and that's something you want to do, yes, you can get hired at a lot of positions you wouldn't get hired as an attorney. And law firms actually like MBAs, especially for corporate attorneys. Most people that are attorneys and MBAs, you can end up getting good jobs as corporate attorneys. Let's see here. When does one gets into an internship after joining law school? You should try to get an internship. It's never a good idea to work during the school year because you really want to get as much experience as you do as well as you can in your academics and throw yourself into that. But you should definitely try to get an internship after your first summer and your second summer. And those are both very important in the summers. But I don't recommend doing any type of internship during the school year. Okay, I am a 3L student and have an interview with a reasonably large firm in town, Las Vegas, that focuses on business, but also advertises itself as a general firm of different services. My question is, how important is it to make sure that I get experience in the firm and the area I'm interested in, which is litigation? I'm concerned about getting stuck doing a lot of transactional work, which isn't my strong point. Okay, you don't know the transactional isn't your strong point right now. I see every year like all these people coming out of Yale Law School that have these degrees in like classics and all this stuff and doing transactional work. Transactional work is not your strong point right now because it just takes a lot longer to learn. People learn litigation in law school when you're doing mock trials and all this kind of stuff. So you don't know that transactional work is not your strong point. It just takes longer to learn, and it's a little confusing when you first start doing it. But sometimes people just know, just like you'll know certain things appeal to you and others don't. You'll know if you don't like transactional work, and if you don't like it and you really want to do litigation, you should ask them if you can do litigation related work. But the problem with working for someone else is you have to do the kind of work that they have. And if they don't have any litigation work, then you need to do what they have. The worst thing that can happen as a young attorney is not to have anything to do. And so you're actually in a good position having a job coming out of law school. What I can tell you is the market for litigators in Las Vegas is very good, and it has been good for some time. So if you do not want to work at that law firm, or you're thinking about doing something else and you're a 3 out, you certainly have a whole year to potentially track down another opportunity to do litigation. That may be what you should do. I don't know what kind of moral obligation you have, but I hope that helps. Oh, and then this says, I got your advice, interview following advice about reaching out to firms who aren't advertising. Thank you. No, you're welcome. And I'm glad you did that. That's smart. Okay, let's see. I got 2 more questions. If anybody has any more questions, and no more questions, I'm almost done. My career has been in government practice. I want to leave the government to earn more money, but I don't know the rate for my skill set. I'm a public defender with lots of litigation and leadership experience. So I don't know. I don't place a lot of criminal defense attorneys, but I would think you would have no problem getting a position as a criminal defense attorney. I think you're actually in a pretty good spot, especially having all the experience you have in the trial experience. I think you're in a great spot. So I don't think you'll have much to worry about. Another thing too is a lot of jurisdictions will pay you if you set up your own practice to defend people, and that's something you can think about too. Let's see here. Last one, and I think I have a couple Q&A. Is energy utilities a good area? What are the downsides? Energy utilities is a good area, but the biggest downsides of energy and utilities is that when the market changes, then things get bad. So right now, the energy and utility attorney we spoke to earlier, when the gas prices and so forth are down, then that practice area dries up. So that's the big risk of it. Now, let's see. Okay, and this one says, okay, this is to everybody. Okay. All right, well, that's it. So thank you, everybody, for being on the call, and we'll talk next week. Thanks. Bye-bye.